Everyone, welcome to our next live episode of our LinkedIn Lives of Think Beginning, Not End. So great to have you guys on. Sorry for the little delay at the start. We had a few technical glitches getting the stream live in with David Wilson from the UK and streaming it out of Australia here. So great to have you guys on. We're pumped about today's show. David, our Managing Director of the Vanden Recycling UK business. David's going to come on very, very shortly. What I want you guys to know is that LinkedIn Live is still in the testing phase. I can't see all the comments live, so I hope you guys can throw a comment in when you are on. And if you are seeing me looking in the direction, guys, I'm actually trying to read through the comments feed I have over here to the side. We are live streaming across my Facebook page and YouTube channel. So to everyone across on my Facebook page and YouTube channel, thank you so much for tuning in. We'd love your questions. I'm just going to really quickly jump on here. Thanks for joining, Daria, Will, Josh, Amy, I've seen you on here too, so thank you so much. I'm going to join David Wilson in very, very shortly and get him on here. So really excited to bring David onto our show. Obviously, David's a massive part of Vanden, and without further ado, hopefully all this goes well. We're now joined by David Wilson very shortly. Here we go, David. You are going to be live on LinkedIn, and you should be seeing the same screen as me. Thank you so much for coming on, Dave.
Hey, Simon, that was pretty punchy. Thank you. You really know how to talk a guy up. Hey, everybody.
Yeah, well, David, David, you're obviously a massive part of Vanden Recycling. To know exactly what you do within the company, and so, David, just a quick little bit of background about yourself and your role in Vanden for audience, please.
Well, I am a long-time recycler. Slightly worryingly, I realized I'm now 22 years in plastics recycling, which I think is probably more, well, I've been in it longer than some employees have been in the company, or alive for that matter. So yeah, it's just ingrained into me. I've spent half my adult life doing this. For the company, I'm the MD of the company in the UK. So that means I try to look after the money at times. I look after compliance. I would get involved in recruitment. I generally get involved in back office administration, do a little bit of trading, although not too much. Look after a lot of compliance, which, and I know that this is a topic that we'll get onto, which includes trading out the PRN responsibility for the business, which is all to do with the cash flowing in. So that's what I do.
Yeah, and David, just for our international audience, we've got people that have tuned in, from the UK. It's just shortly before lunch over there. We've got a bunch of people from Australia on here. Just a little bit of background about how the UK business works. Obviously got a site over there. We have a really strong trading arm. Just a few little insights for our audience so they can understand that a little bit.
It's an interesting business, and I don't think there's too many like it within the UK. It's a business that covers both what we would call trading and site work. So the trading business is, in very broad terms, we buy from a third party and we sell directly to a reprocessor. But we also have a huge capacity by owning a site as well, where we can take material onto that site, do something to it, usually a size reduction, a cleaning, a sorting, a size reduction type process, and then put that out to reprocessors. So we occupy I think a fairly unique position within the UK market. We're strong traders, but we've also got very strong site capability. Most people in plastics recycling tend to do one or the other. Overall volumes, we're about 30,000 tons a year, thereabouts, flowing through our business of material that comes out of UK households, UK industry, UK commerce, and all of that now finds homes within the UK, EU, Far East, Turkey.
Awesome. So David, I thought the first, we kind of worked out a few little topics that we'd jump into
Sure.
here first of all, but something so relevant for many other businesses out there was to kind of just quickly have a chat about how the coronavirus and COVID-19 has impacted our business, and then maybe we can share. I'm leaving this up to you how deep you want to go here. Some of the tools that we've been using for a couple of years now that have helped us pivot a little bit and have helped us keep teams in multiple countries working together. And it's probably more relevant now as more companies are looking to do that as well.
Yeah, well, we've tended to be a remote working business right from the start. So in the UK, in the very early days, we always looked to our parent company in Hong Kong. So obviously, even from day one, we were essentially a remote business. And since that point, we really built the tools to help us operate remotely. And when I say remotely, I mean there's activity going on all over the country. So if you think about the UK, we've got an office in Lisburn, which looks after service delivery, finance, legals, and we've got a site in Peterborough, which looks after physical movement of goods in, processing, and then goods out. But on top of that, we've also got a commercial team that spans the UK. And that commercial team is effectively remote working. Those guys tend to be working from their homes, calling into respective offices perhaps once a week, once a month. It depends on the need. So over time, we have developed a number of ways of allowing people to work remotely. And you mentioned a really important part of how we do that, and that's just use Microsoft tools at our disposal, like Microsoft Teams. And we've been using MS Teams for probably a year and a half, 2 years perhaps, by the time COVID came down. And I noticed there was a real catch up by people that I was talking to who had basically packed up their offices on that Tuesday that our government told us to go home, and had to implement remote working and remote access and Teams on the Wednesday. And you could really tell the difference between those people who had been doing it for a few years like us and those that hadn't. Speaking for the office that I generally work in, the Lisburn office, we packed up one Tuesday afternoon, and before 9 o'clock the next day, we had a fully functioning remote office up and going. And to be honest, I would be surprised if people had really seen that much of a difference in terms of our service delivery level. We have all the phones diverted to our mobiles. We've got remote access through our laptops. It's actually forced us into a more structured way of communicating. So probably internally, in some ways, we're actually communicating a little bit better than we did when we were all sitting in an office together, because you've got the luxury of always being able to go over and talk to somebody. Here you don't, so you've got to formalize it a little bit, but we've got all the tools at our disposal to do that. And I think it's going to make, I honestly think it's going to make a permanent change to the way we work. I think people who run companies like me would have tended to be a little bit worried about people remote working who weren't used to it, and were they actually getting, I suppose, bluntly, were they getting on with the job, or was anybody running into trouble, or was anybody in difficulty and not really talking about it? And those fears of mine, and they were my fears, not the reality, those fears of mine have been alleviated over the 6 or 7 weeks, because I have seen some exceptional performances by people who have all of a sudden been thrown into a remote working environment. But some of the levels of work that are coming out are just remarkable. So I think it's going to make a real change to the way we run our company, and I think we're going to see that reflected certainly across the UK, and I'd say pretty much across the world.
David, something you and I spoke about the other day when we were catching up was even the amount that we travel. Now, you know,
Mm-hmm.
really the nuts and bolts of what I do is actually that traditional BDO role, and all this other stuff is peripheral around that, right? But, you know, we were talking about the amount of travel that we all do, and, you know, will we be able to cut back on some of that travel? I mean, I actually reckon we're going to see a reduction in people traveling, you know, across the country for meetings and things like that. And I think it's probably shown everyone that you've got the right tools. You can actually, you know, still get all the same outcomes without having the expense of all that travel. I mean, we were talking about maybe even that travel reduction of 50% across some companies. Real.
I totally agree. Thinking about my coming year, I would say that will be the sort of level that my travel will go down to. It'll be about 50%. And it's a change of attitude. I have found that, and I think back to there was a meeting that we actually ended up having remotely, and had been set up for probably it was 2 months by the stage that it actually happened. It had been set up for 2 months. And when it was originally set up, it was an in-person meeting. I would have travelled over to England. I'm based in Northern Ireland. I would have travelled over to England to attend it. A couple of other colleagues would have gone to it. And as COVID unfolded, what happened was there was just that little flip in attitude of everybody, that it became from being suboptimal not to attend. You know, I could have opted right at the very start to attend that meeting remotely, but it would have been seen as a little bit suboptimal. And when the meeting actually happened, it would have been seen as almost, well, impossible to do it any other way than remotely. And I think what's happened in everybody's heads is that they've realized that remote meetings actually have real value. They're not a precursor to a real meeting. They're not a precursor to getting real stuff done. It's the real thing. And you can actually get stuff done at virtual meetings. And I think that change in attitude, certainly with me, you know, I've made that shift, as I think virtually everybody has had to. And I've made that shift, and I can't see me going back 100%. There will still be some things that I will want to do in person, you know, new site visits, actually seeing material. You know, there's nothing like the touch and feel of material before you buy it. That's hard to do remotely unless you have seen that material many, many times before. It's, you know, and I know it's a very physical business. It's a business where you got to probe and inquire and really think and sometimes pressure the people you're buying material from to really get an understanding of what it is that they have. And equally, I guess, at the customer end, really pressure people into getting an understanding from them about what it is that they want and the limitations of what they can do with the material that we're providing. So I can't see us ever going to a zero travel business, but certainly I think we can go to a 50% travel business.
Yeah, and that's one of the key things, you know, like just for our audience out there, you know, part of our role and our responsibility in sourcing recycled plastic for manufacturers is making sure we're sourcing the right material. And that does mean going on site and doing a lot of work in terms of inspection, and also helping and working with our suppliers to understand what it is that we're looking at sometimes, and training and educating them so that they understand what we're trying to do. So it is a really big part of what we do. David, I want to jump straight into a big topic, which is the packaging recovery notes. Now, just to give this some context for our audience here, and you'll correct me when you step in, David, the packaging recovery note, or the PRN system in the UK, is essentially the way that some of the packaging is funded to be recycled. Australia, we don't have that legislation in place yet. It's certainly been a hot topic across our podcast, Think Beginning Not End, that we need some kind of legislation in place like that to help fund some of the recycling that needs to happen. David, I'm going to hand it over to you just to explain what the PRN system is, and then how that's changing in the UK, and then you know, just some context around, you know, how that whole system actually functions, please.
The PRN system is as long in this industry as I am. It started, I think, about 1998. Producer responsibility was was the catchphrase, the catch-all phrase that it falls under. And the PRN system was an industry-led, basically government went to industry, both sides of industry, if you think about people who manufacture packaging and then people who are involved in the recycling of packaging. And they went to the industry and said, how would you like to develop a support system that executes producer responsibility? And the idea of producer responsibility is that people who manufacture packaging take responsibility for its recycling or for its disposal. And
yep.
What industry came back with was a market-based system. So what the PRN system is, it recognizes that producers have got to have a way of participating in recycling, but without becoming recyclers themselves. So the vast majority of producers in that group, as they are called producers. So people who manufacture or fill or retail packaging, they exercise that responsibility by going out and buying documentation to say that a certain percentage of the packaging that they have put into the waste stream or that they have put into the supply chain has been recovered and recycled. And the way the UK works this, and it's unique to the UK, the PRN system. Most people across Europe, because the concept of producer responsibility is a European-wide concept. The idea of PRNs, a tradable note market-based system, is uniquely UK. Most people have gone for much more direct intervention, whereas the UK went for a market-based system, as the UK would. The way the UK organised it is that they have said to the entire producer infrastructure, so everybody within the UK that's involved in importing, manufacturing, packing, filling, retailing, that they have an obligation to remove a certain percentage or cause the recycling of a certain percentage of the material that they put into the supply chain. So currently, what the producer group is charged with is that they need to recover 57%, I think it is, in 2020, 57% of plastic packaging. There are different targets set for different materials. So aluminium is a target, steel is a target, wood is a target, glass is a target. But since we're a plastics recycling company, we'll talk about plastics. So everybody that produces plastic packaging or fills it or retails it, as a group, they have got to recover 57% of all the plastic packaging they put into the supply. And that is further subdivided to every individual company within those producer groups understand what their obligation is, their individual obligation. So what does that 57% translate to in terms of ABC Packaging Limited? Well, ultimately what it turns into is a tonnage figure. And it's a tonnage figure that determines how many PRN tons they need to go and buy. And where they get PRN tons from is people like us who either reprocess or export for reprocessing plastics that have gone through the entire supply chain into and ultimately ended up in the ISTR scrap stream. And this applies to plastic packaging only. So every time we export a ton of plastic packaging for reprocessing, we can generate a note, literally a tradable note, and that says we have recycled 1 ton of plastic packaging. Who wants to buy it? That note, and that's the PRN system in a nutshell. Now, huge development to be done there. It's a really quick and dirty system. Probably wasn't seen that way 20 years ago, but lots of the problems with the PRN system, or lots of the, not the problems, but the limitations of it have really come to the fore lately. But you gotta give the PRN system. Yep.
Just for everyone out there, who administers the PRN system? And I'm asking this question because there's a bit of conjecture, particularly over this in Australia, about who should administer a system like that. So who administers that in the UK?
It's administered through a publicly owned database called the NPWD, the National Packaging Waste Database, and that in turn is policed by the Environment Agency, or the UK has got devolved governments throughout it, so it's administered by the Environment Agency or its three devolved counterparts. So it's administered by the NPWD, not administered by the Environment Agency, policed by the Environment Agency. So they make sure that everybody that is obligated to participate in recycling actually does that, and that everybody that generates PRN documents is doing so in a fair and honest way. So administered through, essentially self-administered through a database and policed by the environment agencies. So,
and David, you were just touching on then about, sorry for the delay there, guys. David, you were just starting to, before I cut you off there to answer that question, you were just starting to talk about that it does need some improvement, and where it needs to be improved. And just before we get into that, I just want to quickly acknowledge a couple of other people who have jumped on here live. So guys, just remember, if you see me looking this way in the broadcast, I'm just checking the live feed comments from LinkedIn here. I don't have the live feed comments from Facebook, but just going to very quickly, David, just jump on and just let you know, we've got Savim from our Turkey office on here. We've got Matt from Geelong. Rob Coleman, thanks for coming on live. Really appreciate it. Kathy Ann Jones from the Supply Chain Association. Carol Crumlin, always there. Thanks, Carol. Great to see you on here. And then from our team also, we've got Penny Sammers on here. We've got Will Clark as well. Thank you so much for coming on, guys. I'm going to let David get back into it. He's going to explain how PRN system could do with some improvement and what they potentially are.
Well, I think, the first thing to acknowledge is that the PRN system has actually done a really good job. We started in the UK from essentially a zero base 20 years ago, and very, very quickly ramped up to, in plastics, 40% plus recovery rates of plastic packaging. We're now at 57% recovery rate of plastic packaging. So from a country that really didn't have any infrastructure or mechanism, the PRN system did a really, really quick, as I say, quick and dirty job of getting volumes up and material out of landfill and into recycling. But recently, I think a couple of problems have started to emerge from it. We are moving, I think, really rapidly towards a circular economy society, where we need to be thinking. And this idea has been around for quite a while, but it's really started to take hold, and especially pre-COVID, it was a very, very hot topic of conversation. How do we fully immerse ourselves in the circular economy? And the circular economy really is thinking about how do we get packaging out of the supply chain, and before it goes into landfill or into incineration, back into that supply chain. How do we extract it and use it again? And realizing and properly, fully recognizing that the resources that we have are finite. We tend to grow things or drill things out of the ground, but ultimately the resources that we have are finite. There is only so much land to grow stuff on, and there's only so much stuff under the ground to drill out of it. After that, we've got what we have got, and we have got better ways to use it. Now, one of the limitations of the original PRN system is it takes absolutely no recognition of that concept. So if you think about a bit of plastic, say you have one of these producers who puts 1 ton of plastic packaging into the waste stream, and that ton of plastic packaging is the easiest to recycle in the world. It also contains recycled content. And I'm thinking, say, like a natural HDPE milk bottle. These are everywhere, but they are incredibly easy to recycle. There's a well-recognized collection system. There's well-recognized processes for them, and it's quite easy to incorporate that material back into more HDPE plastic bottles. They have exactly the same obligation for putting that 1 ton into the supply chain as somebody who puts in 1 ton of plastic that is multiple layer, mechanically bound to other plastics, impossible to recycle, and has no recycled content in it. And the unfairness and the stupidity of that, that those two people have exactly the same financial obligation to participate in recycling, is being recognized now. And that's one of the limitations of the existing producer responsibility system, and it's being recognized through extended producer responsibility, EPR, extended producer responsibility, which starts to take account of those sort of things. How recyclable is the stuff that you're putting into the supply chain? And by a slightly separate mechanism, through a tax measure rather than built into the EPR system, or what we think the EPR system will be, are you including recycled content? Are you not only making things easier to recycle, but are you yourself, as a producer of packaging, creating a market for recycling? And once you have that, and once you have those sort of principles really deeply embedded in the systems that you're using, you will move towards a circular economy, a proper circular economy, because it's pretty voluntary at the minute.
Just a quick question, David, that I've got here from Daria. Daria's just asked, does the PRN apply only in the UK? Are there other systems in other countries? Again, we don't have a system like that in Australia yet, and we will move to that, I really believe. David, what about just a little bit there for Daria? It's a great question she's asked on behalf of our audience. What about in Europe? Is there a similar system on the continent in Europe as well?
Well, thanks, Daria. The PRN system does only apply to packaging material that originates in the UK. So to qualify, in order to be able to write a PRN document against 1 ton of material that has been reprocessed or reprocessed, the material's got to be of UK origin, and it's got to be packaging waste. And those are really the only two criteria. It doesn't really matter where it is recycled. It can be recycled within the UK, or it can be recycled outside of the UK. Europe, all European. It's built into, these are part of EU regulations. Every single country in the European Union has to participate in some sort of producer responsibility scheme, but it's been interpreted completely differently by every nation within the EU. I don't think there are any other market-based systems in any EU country. If you take our neighbours in the Republic of Ireland, they operate a system almost at the other end of recycling events. They operate, instead of a system that is based at the point of reprocessing, they operate a system that is recognized value at the point of collection. So if you're a collector of recyclable material in Ireland, you will receive a direct subsidy, essentially, from it's a privately owned company, it's a privately owned scheme, but it is a bit like what are known as compliance schemes in the United Kingdom, who participate in the PRN system. In Ireland, it's a private company that collects monies directly from producers and gives it directly to collectors. So it's a very direct interventionist, non-market-based system. They simply set a fee, and I think it varies a little bit depending on the type of plastic, but it applies to all packaging materials, so paper, aluminium, steel, wood, and plastics. And they simply say, if you're going to put that into the waste stream, it's going to cost you €80 a ton, and they give €80 a ton to collectors. So every country in the EU has some sort of compliance scheme, but all very, very different.
Really, really quickly, David, while you're talking, I've just brought up the Facebook feed as well. I just want to say our viewers over on Facebook, Dan Jordan, Jimmy from our Hong Kong office has joined us via Facebook.
Hey,
so awesome to see Jimmy there. And also Andrew Tarling's joined us via Facebook as well. Now, I know those guys are super busy at the moment, so it's really nice to see them there. And yeah, and anyone else who's watching us from Facebook, David and I, just big shout out to say thank you for watching. I can't see everyone. I think I did see Terry, one of our customers from RPM Pipes here in Australia, was watching earlier as well. David, was there anything else you wanted to add about the PRN before we move on to the next? Was there anything that we didn't cover at the back end of that before I through to a few of the viewer comments here?
The only other thing I would say about the PRN system is, because it's a market-based system, it's going to be a really, really interesting couple of years. How does a PRN system react in an economy that is under real strain? We could be seeing some very dramatic reductions in GDP, and then very sharp recoveries in GDP, and that could lead to very uneven PRN pricing. So escalating PRN prices in 2020 and very sharply falling PRN prices in 2021 might, if the recovery pattern falls in a particular way. Now, bearing in mind that the PRN system has essentially led to a 20% increase in GB in England, mainly England-based capacity, reprocessing capacity in the past 2 years. Is some intervention required? Is some smoothing out of that potential pitfall required to maintain that investment? Because a 20% increase in capacity in a couple of years is not to be sniffed at. That's a valuable contribution to internal reprocessing capacity in the UK. And I think that is potentially endangered by what we are seeing through COVID and the impact COVID is going to have on the broader economy. So that's it. That's my current knowledge. Go on.
So that's a very good segue into our next topic, actually, David, because we're gonna cover a little bit how some material streams might have changed under COVID-19. You know, we're all consuming things very, very differently. You know, and maybe I'll just put a bit of context around the discussion we have for everyone here. You know, we were very much moving away from particularly packaged fruit and vegetables, and probably during COVID-19, we've seen a bit of a shift back to people wanting things pre-packaged, and you know, we need to acknowledge that the important role plastic packaging has in all that. But the second part of that is also making sure that we do recycle it. So David, you've done a little bit on this in the last couple of days. How are material streams changing, and what does that start to tell us about consumption? And are we going to continue to see this? I know over here, I've had the guys in the Murph industry, and that's a material recovery facility where all your curbside recycling bins go, have made some very big comments about an increase in plastic packaging that is going in those bins. You know, what's happening in the UK, David, and what can you share with our UK audience on that?
The situation is incredibly mixed, and there's actually there's quite contradictory information across the UK. So there was some data released yesterday, which would indicate that we actually had a look at it a little bit earlier. We are 23, believe it or not, we are 23% up as of yesterday in terms of recovery rate on 2020 versus 2019 for plastics. That's reported recovery. Now, actual, these numbers can be a little bit flaky at times, but in terms of people reporting how much they've recovered out of the UK waste stream, 23% up 2020 versus this time in 2019. Now, On the other side of things, we have seen some really patchy behaviour across some sectors within the UK. So we have seen some material streams, predominantly commercial. If you think about non-food retail has essentially disappeared within the UK. So all of that material is simply not available. We've seen a bit of a north-south split as well within the UK, where the south of England, contrary to my intuition, is that the south of England appears to be, from a commercial perspective, a commercial and industrial perspective, quieter than the north of England, because we've seen some ongoing good volume trading and good volume purchasing in the north of England versus not quite a collapse, but not far off a collapse across those sort of commercial retail grades in the south of England, and that's been a real surprise. We've seen, even within the domestic sector, if we think about materials that will be flowing through MRFs now, so that would be what we put into our back of door bins, like pot stubs, trays, bottles, newspapers, cardboard, all of that sort of stuff. Even that has seemed patchy. There hasn't been a uniform response across the UK and Ireland. So, for example, in my local MRF, as of a couple of days ago, they were reporting generally up by about 20%. Other MRFs across the UK are reporting steady. Material profiles within MRFs are all over the place. So, not surprisingly, newspaper is down, cardboard is up. So we're not going out to buy newspapers, but we're getting an awful lot of stuff delivered to our homes in cardboard boxes. Yeah. We're seeing bottles up, pot stubs, trays up, aluminium cans up, some glass up, some glass down. So we're drinking a lot, but not eating an awful lot of pickles. Go figure.
Yeah, I thought you guys liked ham and pickle sandwiches. I mean, or similar.
Apparently not every day.
Apparently not right now, anyway.
Yeah.
I'm really critical. I'm just saying, I'm really critical in my own household when, I look at, how our buying behaviours are shifting all the time. I only look in my own recycling bin and see what's in there on a weekly basis. And you can definitely, first of all, not only our buying habits are different, but we're all at home, so we're all eating at home more. So obviously there's an increase on all that packaging that's coming through systems, and we all want our food delivered safe, and that's another big factor here is it's complicated to make recycle. It's complicated at times to make a package 100% recyclable, made from high levels of recycled content. It's a big job to make all that happen. It's an important thing that needs to happen, but I think right now is probably showing us as consumption levels are up, just the sheer volume of, there's a lot of potential packaging that's not recyclable in our bins right now.
That's true. Although even that, we certainly have we've certainly seen in the UK, if you like, a COVID bump where we saw some absolutely extraordinary levels of buying. Started about 10 weeks ago, but that is absolutely tailed off now. So if you think about a manufacturer of PET, and I just want to acknowledge Paul, one of our business development guys, Paul Scott, wrote a really interesting post internally on what he has seen in that back form industry. So this is all from him. And we saw that initial bump where it was hard to keep PET manufacturers supplied. Demand was so great on tray to put goods into the freeze to take home. Now it seems, 7 weeks down the line, we're all starting to look at our groaning freezers and think we better get rid of some of this stuff. So of course there's been a really, really acute drop in demand, and we're starting to see the shelves replenished a little bit in supermarkets. And that's going to even out. Of course, that's going to even out. The population hasn't changed, and while we may be eating at home a little bit more, we're still eating the same number of calories, most of us anyway. Simon, I'm not sure about you. And consumption is going to flatten out after that spike, and then now trough. It'll come back to some sort of level. But I think you're making a really interesting point. You are making a very interesting point. What are buying patterns going to be like? What's buying behavior going to be like in the longer term? I've noticed just from my own, my own personal life, people are buying things differently. They are opting for the first time probably in about 5 years to go for more packaging rather than less packaging. And that's just, there's no data on this yet. That's just the observation of my own eyes. And that is going to have an impact for a long time, until there is a great deal more certainty over the health risks of us all sharing the same space, the same retail spaces as we are.
Yep. David, before we move on to the next topic, which is a good segue into there, I just want to acknowledge another question that I've got here from Cameron Duck. I know Ducky here in Australia. He's worked in the waste management sector for a long time. It's probably going to be hard for me to answer your question specifically, mate. In terms of equipment, what helps your teams to deliver the best product to your buyers? Look, it really depends on the type of material stream that we're talking about, how it needs to be presented. But if you like, send me an email or a DM after with the specific material that you're talking about, and I'll certainly send you something back to help answer that question. But in all cases, the best way to maintain value in plastic is to keep it separated at source and as clean as possible. And I know that might sound like a generic answer right now, but I can give you something more specific after if you just want to shoot me a DM, and I'll reply to that. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for jumping on live on LinkedIn and on the Facebook page. We've got David Wilson, our UK Managing Director of Vanden Recycling. We've already covered the topic of COVID-19, how that's affected our business, and then we've jumped into packaging recovery notes. We've also just recently spoken about how material streams are changing, how we're consuming products differently, and what that means for recyclers and material recovery facilities all over the world. Now we're going to jump into, which is related to this because it's related to packaging, is the price of virgin resin and the effect the downward pressure on virgin resin prices is having on the recycled resin market at the moment, and in turn how that's going to affect potentially some of the brands out there and their commitments to being able to lift their level of recycled content in their packaging. Most of them have made some really fantastic and enormous pledges to get to 30%, 50%. Some companies at 100%. But how are we going to maintain that when we've got massive pressure on the supply chain, and certainly when virgin prices are almost going to be irresistible? How long is it going to be for? David, I'm going to throw to you. You're much more knowledgeable on this topic than me.
This is really fascinating bit of the industry at the minute. And I think it's important to recognize that there is a much more complex relationship between virgin pricing and recycled pricing than there is between oil and virgin pricing. Over the long term, oil goes up, virgin resin prices go up. Oil goes down, virgin resin prices go down. Now, there are some local exceptions to that. A polymerization plant, big polymerization plant comes in or out of line, and you'll find the prices move accordingly. But overall, in the longer term, with that caveat, oil price impacts virgin resin price. There is a much more complex relationship between virgin resin price and recycled pricing, and that's predominantly for two categories of reason. The first is related to cost. In order to produce a ton of recycled resin, the costs involved in producing that ton are largely unrelated in any way to the virgin price, to the virgin polymer price. They're related to how's the material collected, what has it been used for, and what will it be used for. And that essentially tells you how difficult it is to collect, how difficult it is to sort, how much processing you need to put into it, how much energy you need to put into it, which of course could be related to oil price. But there's so much to do with the equipment that you're using there, which impacts the cost of reprocessing it, and the use before and after of that recyclate. So the costs are unconnected with virgin pricing. So that automatically disconnects the price of recyclate from the price of virgin, even though they may be competing in the same space. The cost base is completely different. So you've already got the premise for a discrepancy in pricing. Now, traditionally, until public consciousness was really raised, perhaps say 3 years ago, that seems to have been the awakening point for public consciousness on recycled content. Generally, recycled material, regardless of use, occupied a level a little bit beneath where virgin pricing was. So if virgin resin was $1,000 a ton, post-consumer resin would have been about $900 a ton. One of the things that I've noticed over the past little while is that connection has just gone completely. And it's gone because of that public consciousness. It's gone because the public are pressuring retail, who are pressuring brands to include recycled content in their packaging. And, there's some incredibly stark examples. And there are stark examples of growth in that phenomenon as well. So a year ago, our local Coca-Cola franchise might have been paying $150 more a ton for their PET, their rPET, in comparison to their virgin. That is now probably up to it's not information they're going to give me that freely, but my best educated estimate would be it's going to be 500 to 600 tons over. So almost, not quite 100%, bearing in mind where PET pricing is right now, not quite 100% plus, but not far off it. It is not far off a multiple of 2 for rPET versus PET. The situation in HDPE is even more extreme. HDPE virgin prices are on the floor. You probably, if you really pushed for it, and this is not my area of expertise by any means, but you could probably get a ton of virgin HDPE for €600, €650. Multipliers on our HDPE as recycled equivalent for use in packaging. I mean, we're seeing some reports that would indicate that our HDPE is somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5 times the cost of HDPE, and it is still being bought. And it is being bought because it's still relatively cheap, because virgin pricing is so low, and because of consumer demand. It is absolutely demanded by consumers that on those headline products, there is a substantial amount of recycled content. And you got to bear in mind that this is before we see any legislation. There is no legislation out there that demands recycled content yet. This is consumer demand. This is somebody once put it, this is one of the best exercises of soft power ever seen. People have demanded it, and it has come to be. And I think it's one of the really interesting things about this is how clearly linked to brand sensitivity this is. So those very headline material, PET, connected with some of the biggest brands in the world, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Schweppes. HDPE connected with some of the very big dairy organizations, connected with own brand materials seen on the shelves of supermarkets, highly visible. So you see these extraordinary premiums for those highly visible polymers. But if you take something that is a bit more generic, not necessarily associated with a brand, like LDPE film. Bit more back of store, not quite in people's faces, not quite in people's
Yeah.
consciousness. There are premiums there. Our LDPE is trading at a higher level than virgin LDPE, but the premiums that you get in our LDPE are nowhere near the premiums that you're getting in rPET or our Hdpe, because those are branded. People put their names on those materials in a way that they do not put their name on LDPE. And it just shows, for me, it shows, the route forward. If we're going to make a success of this, it has got to be hand in hand with the brands. And we have got to make, we've got to raise awareness that stuff on the supermarket shelves is not the only plastic involved in getting that product to you. There's a bunch of stuff out the back of store as well that we've really got to pay attention to.
Yeah, David, I've got a really quick question here from Rob Holman, related exactly to this topic, and I know I've spoken about this a little bit before for everyone out there, but Rob's got a good question here that's worth us having a discussion over. Why not introduce a varying countervailing levy on virgin for single use related to oil prices? Now, I've made a few comments before about, do we need to give some kind of concession for companies using recycled resin over virgin resin, for example? What are your thoughts on that? Because that comment from Rob really kind of goes along with that, and I know that might upset the virgin resin makers a little bit, but do you think that we are going to see things like that? I believe there's some talk in the EU about that, right?
Yeah, and again, the way the EU does everything, it lays down a framework and then lets every nation interpret it as they see fit. So within the UK, what is being proposed is a straight fixed fee, and it means that if your packaging product, plastic packaging product that you put onto the market, doesn't contain 30% of recycled content, you will get a tax of £400 a tonne levied on the material that you do use. And I have some sympathy with the idea of index linking it to oil, for example. It creates a fairness, I suppose, in the longer term. But the problem could come that in the short term, when we see a crash in oil prices and a crash in demand, it simply doesn't raise enough. It's not enough of a disincentive to use virgin over recycled. And then, it makes you then get into some sort of dynamic taxing, where if oil prices are low, you all of a sudden scoot the tax rate up or adjust it midterm. It feels to me that just a straightforward fixed fee, it's acknowledging the problem. It's acknowledging that we need to get recycled content into plastic packaging, and that the packaging manufacturers are absolutely responsible for creating a market for the material that they have in the first place put into the waste stream. And that's a key point. They must create a market for that, because the number of secondary use markets are finite. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just to absolutely straightforwardly disincentivize that. Now, I think the feeling is that within the UK, probably the proposed fee is a little bit soft. £400 a tonne is within the range of dynamics of polymer pricing. So, we've probably seen £400 a tonne fall in polymer pricing in the past number of months. So you could argue that it's not enough. The point for me is, though, that it sets the mechanism, and there's history here within the UK of setting mechanisms to really get things going. So, for example, one of the great things a quarter of a century ago that really kicked recycling off was the introduction of landfill tax. Landfill tax was introduced at pence, literally pennies per tonne, and it's now several tens of pounds. I can't remember, 75, 80 pounds a tonne, perhaps even more a tonne.
Yeah.
And that's a very typical mechanism by global treasury, global government treasuries, to set mechanisms, get an initial tax in there, and once the mechanism is set, you really get to see how the world will respond. Italy, by contrast, has done, I think, something very similar. They've set a flat fee, but that flat fee is up around €1,000. So they've gone in very hard, very heavy, very significantly. So it's an interesting thing because you've got two numbers that you can play about with there. You've got the fee, and then you've got the recycled content below which that fee kicks in. So you can really start to tweak a market once you get that mechanism up and going. So yes, to answer the question, there are mechanisms coming that will create those markets. Whether they're related to an index or whether they need to be related to an index, I'm not sure.
David, just a couple of comments here before we start to begin to wrap this up. These are some valid comments, and I would just want to read them out to acknowledge them to hear it, everyone. These are on the LinkedIn feed, guys. I'm jumping between that and the Facebook feed. Rob Holman's made a comment. RPET is now an accepted marketing cost for big brands. Well, I think covered that topic as probably Rob made that comment. Most certainly, brands know that their customers want recycled content. They want their packaging to be recyclable. We know that, and there are some great brands doing some awesome work in this space.
Yep.
And at the end of today's show, I'll tell you what I've got coming for Thursday. Cameron Duck, again, another good comment here, mate. Very important point for producers to understand the connection between world factors and pricing as to what their product is worth. That's a very good comment. We come across that on a daily basis, in what we do on the ground. So some really, really good comments there. And just acknowledging Malawa, thank you so much for coming in, mate. Appreciate you joining. Simone Anderson, really appreciate you coming on too, Simone. I see you over on Instagram and Facebook on my page all the time. So thank you so much for coming on LinkedIn. It's great to see you over here too. And I've got another question here, just very quickly, David. It's actually from Terry K. Terry's asked a question. Are we seeing higher levels of contamination? And I know this is just going back a step. I just want to make sure I cover these questions where I can. From what I'm hearing here in Australia, I'm not seeing it on the ground because I'm obviously not out on site as much as I was, but we are seeing high levels of contamination, particularly plastic bags. What are you seeing in the UK? Is that just going back to our topic on the sector material recovery facilities? Are they seeing high levels of contamination too?
Yeah, certainly in the early days of the lockdowns in the UK. The paper industry in particular was screaming about contamination, and I think contamination is a bigger problem for plastics and especially film contamination of cardboard, post-consumer cardboard. And I think it's just to do with the way MRFs are set up. They're going to be particularly sensitive to that level of contamination. From what we've seen, it's hard to tell because a bit like you. It's a few weeks since I stuck myself in front of a bale and really had a bale of scrap plastics and really had a good look at it. But from what we're seeing, we're not seeing in the material that we're trading any particularly elevated reports of contamination. So plastics seems to be doing okay. Cardboard seems to be in real trouble. Probably to do with the internal workings of MRFs. I just want to get back to one of the points that you raised earlier. I absolutely agree with you. One of the most again, I just want to reference back to our local Coca-Cola franchise. 2 decades ago, those guys were making some extraordinarily innovative steps in how they were thinking about bottle design, long before there was real hardcore public pressure. Literally decades before there was public pressure. They had got rid of PVC inserts in their caps. They had got rid of, they moved to stretch LDPE labels on their bottles, so got rid of a glue line. All of that, expensive, tricky stuff to go and get right in a high volume manufacturing industry, never mind one for pressurized water getting rid of those seals. But they voluntarily thought, right, how can we improve what we are putting into the market? And they were literally 2 decades ahead of where the pressure points are right now.
Yeah, sorry, David, the audio just cut out there just at the end, but I certainly agree. I mean, the packaging technologists within these companies, they all care about the same things that we all do. And, yes, they have a product to deliver, but I know that they're all working really, really hard, on this and making sure that our packaging is recyclable. It's such a really big topic. David, just to try and close this out a little bit for everyone, just taking us back to Vanden World, guys, we started off giving you guys a bit of insight into Vanden Recycling, and we're now been going for an hour, so that's pretty good. But I just want to try to take everyone back into Vanden World a little bit here, and I am going to try and get Damien and John on at some stage. But David, I just want to ask you if you can give the audience some context. We hear it from me a lot. How many different materials do we trade, and how many different countries are we operating in and sending materials to? It'd be great just for you to share that with the audience as we try and work towards closing out here.
Oh, wow. We should give me a bit of warning on that one. I guess I should know those. I guess I should know those numbers off the top of my head. From my memory of, so we've obviously a lot of internal documentation. I think the last time I totaled up the number of different materials that we do, I think it was about 138 different materials. Including gradings, so included in that would be various grades of LDPE film. I think there were 138. It's probably rude to go and have a look at the appropriate spreadsheet right now. In terms of countries, we're the name of our parent company says it all, Vanden Global. We recognize that supply chains are global. There is a tendency to start thinking more locally, and that's fine, and that's something that we're fully bought into. But nonetheless, right now, today, supply chains are global. And as I say, the name of our parent company, Vanden Global, reflects that. So we sell material to Asia, Turkey, throughout the EU, north to south of the EU, west to east of the EU. Throughout the UK and Ireland. This company sources material in the UK and Ireland. The rest of Vanden sources it globally. The number of countries that we deal with, that's going to be one more for Damien. I really should know that off the top of my head, but it's I'm just trying to think. Probably looking down on our data from last week, we would have sold to 10, 15 countries last week. Probably. Yeah,
I mean, it's extraordinary, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot with that one, David. I know it's hard to keep up with what we are doing, but I mean, it's an amazing journey. That we've all been on. There's so much more work to be done, guys. I'll wrap it up with David here. I just want to say thank you, David, very much for giving us over an hour today. I know how busy you guys are there, particularly today, and I know how busy our commercial teams and service delivery teams are over there. I'm really lucky. It's nighttime here, and I'm sure I've got some viewers that are sitting back with a drink, a wine, a beer, and tuning in. And again, thank you so much, guys, for watching this LinkedIn Live series that we've been running of the Think Beginning Not End podcast. We're going to bring you guys more guests from inside Vanden. There's 2 particular people that I'm slowly working on that hopefully will get on as well. Look, guys, I do want to say, if you want to reach out to David, David, how is the best way for people to contact you? And I'm going to be general here to start with. If you are a supplier or potential supplier or customer, I urge you to go to the website and the Get in Touch page on the Vanden Recycling website. Go to the Get in Touch page. And the reason I ask you to go to that is there's some specific questions which will help us drive your inquiry to the right office or the right people within our organisation. But David, that would probably be the best place for people to get in touch with you. Obviously, they can always send you a message over LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. If anybody wants to send me an email directly, my email address is on the website. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, david@vandenrecycling.com. No dots, no initials, nothing, just David at. So I'm a fairly easy person to find.
Thank you so much for coming on, David. And again, David, what's the time over there now? Must be just getting towards the end of the lunch break over there, right?
No, my stomach tells me it's lunchtime.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely my dinner time. I haven't eaten yet, so I'm going to go and have something to eat. Wow. But again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thursday's show is a massive segue from today. We've got the president of the World Packaging Organization on LinkedIn Live Thursday morning, AM Australian Eastern Time. I want you guys to tune into that, because some of the topics that we talked about today with David are going to be very relevant to what we talk about with Pierre. On Thursday's show, the president of the World Packaging Organization is going to be on our LinkedIn Live series Thursday morning at 8 AM Australian Eastern Standard Time. That should beam into the UK and also into the US at a reasonable time, I hope, not too late, not too early. Again, guys, thank you for tuning in. This is not possible without you guys watching. And if you do have any questions, please add them in the comments. I will get in the comments after. You guys send us a DM. But until next time, please always, as everything with Vanden, please think beginning, not end. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night, guys. And if you're over in the UK, thank you so much for watching and have an awesome Tuesday. And we'll see you guys soon. Thanks, David.
See ya.